Salve galera da Budo TV, hoje eu estou aqui em Nova York visitando o professor Carlos Jiménez. Nós vamos conversar um pouquinho, não apenas sobre a história dele, mas também nós vamos conversar a respeito das artes marciais que ele ensina aqui, que é o Balitawak e o Kajukenbo, tá bom? Professor Carlos, muito obrigado por nos conceder essa entrevista. É uma grande honra poder estar aqui te visitando, conhecer aqui o seu espaço, para a gente também poder conhecer um pouquinho e o senhor compartilhar com a gente dessa trajetória, da sua trajetória e dessas modalidades que você ensina. Bom, professor Carlos, então, se puder se apresentar, conversar um pouquinho, comentar com o pessoal um pouquinho da sua história, da sua trajetória pessoal.
Thank you so much. Well, my name is Carlos Jiménez Navarro. Thank you so much. Well, my history is very short, basically. I started actually doing martial arts when I was 3 to 4 years old, but that was more of like as a fun way for me to just do sports after school. But then I grew up, and I think the first martial art that I ended up practicing was in Aikido when I was like 12 to 13 years old. In the time, I think that as teenagers do, we started to think about different things, inquire about different arts. So I just moved around in that period. Although I started practicing Aikido through those years, I also did other martial arts. I remember doing a little bit of full contact, a little bit of kickboxing, a little bit of Thai boxing. And then I stumbled across capoeira, which also took me from when I was 15-ish to my 20s. And I think that throughout all these years, I was just looking something that was appealing to me, but also something that I could find useful for self-defense. And that's when someone who actually was from Aikido said that there was these gymnasium that was teaching this martial art was called Kajukenbo. I have no idea what Kajukenbo was. It was just like a weird sounding name, but I went there and I was hooked immediately. So I started around like 98. I was still like 17 years old until now, basically. So in that time, basically, we always have Kajukenbo and Filipino martial arts. So our organization always has taught together Filipino martial arts with Kajukenbo, which is very, very compatible. So do you want to know a little more about the history of the Kajukenbo?
Yes. So let's talk a little bit about the history of Kajukenbo.
So a little brief history about Kajukenbo. So basically 5 different martial artists decided to get together around 47 to 49, meaning 1947 to 1949 in Hawaii. And basically the idea was to combine their knowledge from their different martial arts to create a martial arts that can actually benefit from each other. So the idea was to create again that idea that if I have a technique that can actually be useful against something that you do, maybe we should combine that and how we can put everything together in a logical way. So that basically leads to Kajukenbo, which is an acronym for the martial arts that created the system. Ka is Korean karate or Tangsudo, Ju is Judo and Jiu-Jitsu, Ken is Kempo, and Bo is Chinese boxing. But nowadays, most people use Bo as like Western boxing, as the regular boxing that we practice here in America, for example. The idea behind this again was to combine these knowledge from different martial arts to create a martial art that can again adjust to every single distance, every single type of attack. So creating a really truly blend of martial arts or mixed martial arts. Keep in mind that obviously at that time they have the knowledge that they have and they did their best to create that knowledge together. But then after 49, from what from the history that I've read and the things that I've heard from other people, they kind of disbanded that idea. And there's only one person, in this case, the CEO, Adriano Pirado, who is going to be the founder, the co-founder of Kajukenbo, continue the efforts of expanding that art that they created. He, together with his brother, kind of like continued to create not only new techniques, but also created new forms, expanded a little bit more. And then together, created a series of, again, a curriculum that they could teach to other people. And they started to teach to the first people that we coined as the pioneers. And why is the pioneers? Because those people, among all these people that started training with them, some of them came to mainland the United States. Keep in mind that This is 47 to 49 in the United States. Hawaii became a state of the United States officially, I think in 1950, which means, or correct me, 1950 something, which means that this happened right before. So after that, a lot of movement happened. Like in the 50s and 60s, a lot of people started to travel more from Hawaii to particularly California, which is basically how it expands throughout mainland the United States. And through the naval bases, keep in mind that a lot of people were in the Navy, a lot of people were in the military, they expand that throughout the world. Basically, that's one of the reasons why, in fact, I know Kajukenbo, because there's a American base in Madrid, in Spain, and one of the instructors that was there was the one who actually expanded Kajukenbo throughout Europe. And then there are people now who are started to study in different areas of the world, and now they're starting to create their own dojos and started to expand that concept of Kajukenbo. Keep in mind, obviously, that at that time there's an evolution happening in Hawaii, there's another evolution happening here in North America, and then throughout the world, they started to combine whatever it is the knowledge that they have with whatever it is that they have in that place. So, for example, there's a lot of interesting things about Kajukenbo that I think can make it special in a way, but also has been the cause of Kajukenbo not being that known, is that they tend to adapt to the territory that they are, so they sometimes combine with other things. There's amazing Kajukenbo styles or sub-styles that have been created. For example, in Thailand, in which they mix with Muay Thai, and there's a style, if I don't recall, is called Lotus, that is kind of a mix of Kajukenbo with some Muay Thai. So that is to tell you that because of that facility, with that easiness of blending with other martial arts, that's also part of the reasons why Kajukenbo is also not well known. And Kajukenbo was also not well known because at that point, what was known at the time was Kempo. No one knew what Kajukenbo is. So a lot of the times when you see Kempo schools teaching Kajukenbo and maintaining the name of the Kempo, that's because it was easier for the people at that time to just open a school and say that they were practicing Kempo, because a lot of people, or karate, because a lot of people knew what karate was, what Kempo was. So it's one of the reasons why, again, is that actually not being that popular as it should be. Also, in terms of the history, again, as I said before, the military bases were in charge of distributing these through all these amazing instructors who were in the army, and they went through different places. And in this case, there was a professor now named Angel Garcia Soldado, who is the person in charge of Spain at that moment, particularly in the 80s, of expanding that. And my instructor, Tomas Encinoso, studied under him. And he studied from the Canary Islands, where I'm from, and then I think in '94 was when he opened officially in the Canary Islands. So it's kind of like a brief history from the Kajukenbo to where I get to study Kajukenbo. So one of the things that, again, makes Kajukenbo is that obsession that they have at the moment, meaning the co-founders of Kajukenbo and himself as well, is that idea of being able to defend themselves against pretty much any type of attack. That includes weapons as well. So it's one of the reasons why they early on incorporated the idea of incorporating weapons as part of the system, but also they merged with other knowledge from other martial arts, mainly Filipino martial arts. Keep in mind that Hawaii was kind of like a huge melting pot. At that time, there were people literally from everywhere, from Japan, from Korea, from the Philippines. In fact, Adriano Pirado himself was of Filipino descent, so you can imagine. He always said that he trained Filipino martial arts, although we don't know exactly the style that he trained, but he coined that to one of his family members, I think it was his dad or his stepdad, who taught him Filipino martial arts. And in fact, part of the thing that you see in Kajukenbo that you don't see in other styles of Kempo is that idea of striking at the same time that someone is parrying, which is something that is very similar to the gunting concept that you have in Filipino martial arts. And talking about that, I think there's an interesting thing to know. It's like, what makes Kajukenbo Kajukenbo? There's a lot of principles, but I think that there are three that are very common among all of the different systems of Kajukenbo. And what I mean by systems of Kajukenbo is like there are different branches of Kajukenbo, and all of them have different influences, but what they have in common is that at least they have three principles. Number one is you rarely are going to be parrying. Most of the times you're going to be parrying and punching, which is what we call the 2-in-1, or parrying, punching, and kicking at the same time, which is what we call the 3-in-1, which is the concept that I was telling you about before, which is that idea of something similar to gunting, which is basically you move the hand towards one side and you punch. You can also use your elbow. You can also use your elbow and your knees at the same time. So that 2-in-1 and the 3-in-1 is the first principle. The second principle is what they call the stunning blow, which is basically when you strike, you have to use your entire body, your mechanics, to put as much power as possible into your strike, so you can make the other person regret having even thought about striking. So basically the idea behind this is to stun people. That's why it's called the stunning blow. And the third thing that makes Kajukenbo is that this is very embedded from the beginning of Kajukenbo. Is like when you do a technique, you always are looking, because you're always assuming that there will be more than one person attacking. So again, those three things make Kajukenbo. And in terms of the systems and the methods, there are different methods of practice that then became their own systems. Some of them were approved by Sijo himself, some of them were not approved, but basically they are a continuation of Kajukenbo. There are many that I can think of. Kajukenbo is probably one of the most popular ones, which is created by Sifu Alda Cascos from Marciais in this case, and Alda Cruz, also having different systems. There's also old systems that are a little bit less known, like the one that I mentioned before, in this case Lotus, or the Cha3, which is basically compound housing, which is supposed to be the third dojo that appeared in the beginning, when they were creating different dojos of different places to train. This is the third one that they have. In this case was created by a guy named Mario Tiwana, who was a boxer. Also, I think that's actually an important thing, because it's a current thing for Kajukenbo. A lot of the times what they were thinking about is like how to defend themselves against boxers, because boxers were like the most dangerous people that they knew at the time. So a lot of the things that you see in the beginning on Kajukenbo, a lot of the techniques that you see are focused on how to defend yourself against punches, particularly how to block the punches and striking at the same time. So that's why the concept of 2-in-1 and 3-in-1 is so important. So that idea that I was talking about a second ago about the 2-in-1 and 3-in-1, as I said before, the idea is I'm here, for example, right foot forward, just in case. But anyway, it doesn't have to be, by the way. We normally train even with no guard, just in case, because a lot of times fights happens like this, and you have to be able to move and attack at the same time. But for the sake of brevity, we're going to go now right foot forward. And let's say that the professor in this case punches. So obviously, normally you will parry, right? Or you will move your head, or you would use your footwork as a way for you to look for the distance. All of that is perfectly fine. We study, we also practice. But a lot of times when we start with a simple parry and punch. So when we do the parry and punch, is pushing a little bit slower. In this case, what you do is you're trying to hurt as much as you can, but keep in mind you're not entering with that, because the other person has another hand and he's going to punch me with this one, and that might be hurting me, right? So again, what do we do in this case? Either moving away from that, right? Or introducing the 3-in-1, which as you can see, I'm kicking at the same time. So the idea behind this is to always kick to the groin. So we have a lot of focus on kicking the groin or striking to the groin, because again, we want to minimize the amount of time that I'm going to spend with that person. So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to cover the upper body by doing this or this, and I'm going to attack and I'm going to sneak that kick. And where? Most of the times, as I said before, towards the groin. So as you can see, one simple solution will be parry, punch, and kick at the same time. So when the professor punches, we'll do this at the same time, or moving away, and as you do, you move away from that and kicking at the same time. So that would be another example of 3-in-1. In this case, it will be more escaping as you're kicking that way. Now keep in mind that that's kind of like a signature move that you're going to see in a lot of techniques in Kajukenbo, particularly because when you do these, you are attacking to the groin, and the person probably is going to move downwards. Yeah. When the person moves, I can strike like this, or if the person goes even lower, I can attack with the elbow, or I can attack the elbow from the side. But as I said before, this is called Kajukenbo, so it's like a blend of martial arts. So there's a jiu-jitsu, or judo, which means that if I get a hold when I enter here, and I can enter to trap, I can enter to get a hold of the person and continue kneeing, I'm going to take advantage of that. That becomes more of our grappling. Keep in mind also that although we train the same concept as in judo, we train our osotogaris, our uchimatas, taiotoshi, all of these techniques, we have them. We normally do them in a way in which we help the other person go to the ground. So my idea is not necessarily to grab and start moving around until I find the right opportunity to throw the person. Is mostly if I see here, for example, an enter to the groin, and I have the opportunity to kick that leg away, that will be our osotogari, in this case by striking the leg, right? And then obviously when you go to the ground, you deal with the person to the ground, in which you can attack the person, knee, and as usual, always make sure that the person is not moving, and also looking to one side, looking towards the other side, so you can make sure that there's no second attacker.
In Kajukenbo, the terminology is legacy from these other martial arts. So do you use Japanese terms, Western terms?
That's a great question. I think that in general, particularly me, when I want to explain a technique like judo, I always keep that as a, as an honor to that martial art. So I continue to say the jiu-jitsu terms. Like I continue to say again, uchimata, osotogari, ouchigari, kouchigari, because it's going to be easier for me to explain one thing and for them to identify what we're doing. In Kajukenbo, sometimes we would just say, okay, this is an outer strike to the leg, and you're going to throw the person from the outside. So rather than saying a name, right? Again, the problem with that is that it's difficult to identify, but also I prefer to give the Japanese term so we know where it comes from.
So you have the both options to use the original terms, traditional terms, and more contemporary, more modern terms in the common language.
Yeah, so for example, this is an outer rip, right? In this case, what you're doing is you're ripping the leg by going from the outside.
Yes.
So you can use the outer rip, or you can say, in this case, osotogari, which is basically the Japanese term for that. But it's the same thing, it's just that I prefer to say the Japanese term so a lot of people can then do the research, practice on judo, and then get better at those particular techniques. Also, in terms of the names of the ranks, curiously we use actually Chinese names like Shifu, Shigam, Sijo. So all of those come from more Chinese martial arts, and that's because Sijo himself had more success, I think, by meeting and having relationships with people who came from Chinese martial arts, and then he has many associations of different Chinese martial arts. So I think that as a way for him to honor that, he continued to use the Chinese martial arts.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Explain this process, this roadmap of the Kajukenbo. Start today. So what's supposed to learn first, and right after, how that?
So here's the thing, it's an interesting thing. So Kajukenbo allows for certain freedoms in the way that you teach, right? Particularly when you become more than after Sifu, which is third degree black belt. After that, you're encouraged to look at a way for you to modify, if you will, the curriculum in a way that fits best on whatever it is that you do, and incorporate some of the things. So obviously you have to keep the core, which is what we teach here, right? So keep in mind that there are plenty of methods. The method that we practice is the Emperado method, which is the one that he created. However, the Emperado method includes techniques like parry punch, kicks, and then pull the person towards the ground, kneeing. And as you can see, that's complicated for a person who's just starting and doesn't understand how to punch, how to kick, how to measure the range, how to grab the person, how to throw the person towards the ground. So there are many iterations. So a couple of years ago, when I became a third degree black belt, I started to think about ways in which I would teach it slightly different. Because for me, it was a struggle to see how people were confused. So what happened is at the end, they tended to memorize techniques rather than understanding the principles. So that made me go into like a path, and I ended up going even to school that actually had a master's in neuroscience of learning, and that's what I'm trying to incorporate nowadays. And the way that I explain nowadays is by separating each belt per distance. So in this case, we start striking longer range to medium range, meaning kicking and punching for yellow belt.
Okay.
So why? Because that's the first thing that you're gonna encounter. In a fight is like longer range. The first thing that a person can do to you from the longest range is kicking and punching. So I want you to really get good at punching and kicking and how to defend yourself against those punches and kicks.
So in the roadmap of the grades, you are taking shorter distance.
Correct.
So I start at long, medium, until of the moment that I'm closer to you.
Yeah. So the what's super simple is I get closer now, I get to orange belt, elbow, headbutts, knees, even using my fingers to push away and trapping slightly, but only with the hope of striking. So first two levels, yellow and orange, then you get into striking. I get closer to you, now I can grapple with you. This grappling sending, that's our purple belt. In this case, I can control your body, like in this case, single leg, double leg, or your body control exclusively just to control the person's body. And then that is our per belt, then we throw the person to the ground and we go to the ground. That's going to be our blue belt. What do you do when you're in the ground? Well, you try to escape as much as you can, but you have to have some basics on how to defend yourself against someone trying to strangle you on the ground. So that's our blue belt. Now we're done with the empty hand and we go back to the longest range and we have the longest weapon. For our green belt, the next thing that we see is the sticks. Sticks, which they call clubs, is a long range attacks. We have the long range weapons, and then we get closer. Now it's our brown belt. We have our knives, and that's when we defend against our knives. And the last one is black belt, which is when we get all of these concepts and we start thinking, what if there's another attack? What can I use? Strategies to use even your own clothes. How can I make sure that I can pull that towards the other side? I can grab. Do you have a hoodie? Can I trap this? All of these elements are going to be seen in black belt. The clap is actually an interesting thing. That was actually very smart of you that you noticed that. The clap was actually because there were 3 clubs in the beginning. Clubs in the sense of like places where people train. There were 3 clubs in the beginning where they started training, which is, if I remember, other than Palama Settlement, which is the birth of Kajukenbo, there are 2 YMCAs. I don't know if you know YMCAs, but it's like an entity that exists all over the United States. And then basically they have gymnasions, and that's where they started training. So those are the 3 clubs that they started with.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in Kajukenbo, there's competitions?
There are competitions.
Like comité in karate?
There are different versions. There's your MMA version with MMA style of fighting, but also rule sets. There's your point for those of you who are not interested in doing a full takedown or anything else. And then there's competitions also about like forms. There's also competitions in terms of self-defense in which you show certain techniques. So there are different type of competitions.
Okay.
The level of compromise you're gonna have with the practice.
Okay. There's any kind of global federation of Kajukenbo? No.
Yes.
Yes.
So we're under the KSCI, which is the one that he founded. Which is Kajukenbo Self-Defense Institute.
Okay.
And that's the one that we're under. Most of Kajukenbo are under KSCI, but there's also other institutions like KSDS, Kajukenbo Self-Defense System, I think.
Okay.
And the different federations. But the one we have is the KSCI, which is the one that he founded.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you talked that unfortunately he passed away.
Yes,
years
in
ago.
2000s he passed away unfortunately. Keep in mind the last years of his life he was in a wheelchair. He had like a triple bypass, he had coronary problems, so he could barely get out of his wheelchair because of that. But he was still teaching seminars, he was still conducting seminars with the help obviously of his students.
And the other co-founders also passed away.
That's an interesting thing. For a while, a lot of people assumed that everyone else was dead, but no, there's some people who are still alive.
Okay.
And from what I know, I think that the last one passed away not so long ago. But yeah.
Okay. Anyway, you can see that this Kajukenbo win the challenge to pass by the first generation. Nowadays, especially in your case, you are the 3rd generation of your lineage.
More than I'm like so, 15th generation, yeah.
Yeah, because this is a challenge for any style. That is when the founder passed by, to have people to keep the legacy alive.
Yeah, yeah.
And I saw in a way that you explained that this is a concern for you. The legacy, the idea of to keep the legacy of the art.
Well, I must say, I actually was very, very, very fortunate. So the secretary of the KSCI, which is Grandmaster Glenn Fraticelli, which is the person that I'm under right now. So basically, both my instructor and myself are under Grandmaster Glenn Fraticelli. So we're under his lineage. He's very passionate about history. And the reason I'm saying that I'm very fortunate is because I'm very passionate, but he's the one who just took it to a different level. He went to the Emperador's houses and then actually got a lot of information. And for like a year, he was just teaching out of his own, voluntarily. He was just teaching every single week a lesson on history. So we got to see how all of this was developed, and it was amazing. So I think kudos to him, and if you want to name him, please, because he deserves the kudos. He's done an amazing, amazing work.